Good morning and welcome to the 11th meeting of 2025 in Session 6 of the Equalities, Human Rights and Civil Justice Committee. We have received apologies this morning from Maggie Chapman and Marie McNair will be joining us remotely. Our first agenda item is to agree to take agenda items 3, 4 and 5 in private. Agenda item 3 is to consider the evidence heard on the International Covenant on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights. Agenda item 4 is to consider the committee's approach to scrutiny of the Legislative Consent Memorandum for the Border Security, Asylum and Immigration Bill. And agenda item 5 is to consider the committee's approach to the Scottish Human Rights Commission's report on progress in moving people from institutions to independent living following the committee's evidence session on the 1st of April this year. Are we all agreed to take these items in private? Thank you. We're all agreed. Our second agenda item this morning is to take evidence on the Scotland-specific issues raised in the UN Committee on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights, concluding observations and recommendations to the Scottish Government at the end of a 5-year review of compliance with the International Covenant on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights. I therefore refer members to papers 1 and 2 and I welcome to the meeting Cocab Stewart, MSP, Minister for Equalities. I would also like to welcome her supporting officials this morning, Ian Davidson, Deputy Director for Social Security Policy, Alexandra Devoy, Human Rights Policy Lead, Treaties and International, Andrew Fraser, Child Poverty Briefing and Strategy Team Leader, and Kat McKeenan, Deputy Director, Equality Scottish Government. You're all very welcome this morning. I would like to first invite the Minister to make a short opening statement. Thank you, Minister.
Thank you, Convener, and I'm very grateful to the committee for inviting me to give evidence today. I welcome the role of this Parliament as a human rights guarantor for the people of Scotland and the distinct work of this committee in driving progress on this. I'm looking forward to discussing and working with the committee on Parliament's and committee's approach to our national level scrutiny following on from the international human rights reporting mechanisms. Internationally, the leading role of Parliament in supporting and overseeing the implementation of human rights has been formally recognised. Of course, all of our parliamentary committees have a role to play in this. Over the last 2 decades of this Parliament, it's played a critical role in developing a culture of human rights. This is demonstrated, for example, by the establishment of the Children and Young People's Commissioner of Scotland and the Scottish Human Rights Commission, along with the work to incorporate international human rights treaties, such as the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child. With regards to international reporting of human rights, we welcome the international scrutiny of our human rights record. International treaty reporting in relation to state parties takes place on a cyclical basis and drives improvement by requiring state parties to account for past performance and to respond to recommendations for future actions. Engaging with international human rights monitoring mechanisms such as the United Nations and the Council of Europe ensures that we remain vigilant about implementing our international obligations and focused on making continued improvements to the realisation of rights for people in their everyday lives. It also gives us an opportunity to share examples of good practice and strong delivery internationally. In February, the Scottish Government officials took part in the 7th periodic review of the International Covenant on the Economic, Social and Cultural Rights as part of a UN delegation to the UN as part of the UK delegation to the UN in Geneva. The interactive dialogue is an important transparency, scrutiny and accountability mechanism, and we welcome the opportunity to provide evidence on the actions that Scotland has taken in relation to devolved matters since the last reporting period of 2016. The UN Committee welcomes Scotland's approach to the incorporation of international treaties to tackling issues such as child poverty and drug-related deaths. The committee published its concluding observations on the 3rd of March, which sets out the recommendations for both reserved and devolved policy areas. There are over 130 recommendations to the UK State Party, with 49 recommendations relating to Scottish Government devolved policy areas. It is worth noting that the interactive dialogue is historically significant, as the UN Committee received the largest number of civil society reports for any State Party review. This is an example of an achievement for us all to be proud of, and building on this as we are engaging with civil society to consider our next steps and how we can strengthen our approach to implementation. So the engagement includes the development of a human rights digital tool to openly and transparently track concluding observations from international treaty bodies and provide a platform from which to monitor implementation in Scotland. A design group has been established, which includes representatives from civil society as well as parliamentary officials, to advance the phased development of the tool with a view to launching an initial product by March 2026. Our shared ambition is that going forward, the information in the tool will be useful for civil society and Parliament, including committees such as this, for the purpose of enhanced informed scrutiny on the implementation of concluding observations. And this will help to drive forward policy improvements and resilience. As the committee knows, we are working to develop proposals to incorporate a number of international treaties, such as the International Covenant on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights, into domestic law. Incorporation of treaties into domestic law strengthens the protection of human rights by making them a part of the domestic legal framework, ensuring that these rights are accessible to the people who need them and increasingly embedded in all policy, practice and service delivery. Through this, we aim to build a stronger human rights culture in Scotland. We're taking steps now to lay the groundwork for future legislation through the development of human rights capability building across the public sector. And all of this work is closely linked to our equality and human rights mainstreaming strategy. So the focus of today's evidence session is on the UN Committee on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights recommendations on Scottish devolved policy. And whilst this treaty covers a wide scope of devolved policy areas from education to health, I understand that the committee is particularly interested in hearing about evidence relating to social security, where our radically different Scottish system is founded. Of course, on the fundamental principle that social security is a human right, which is in very sharp contrast to the UK approach, which only last month Amnesty International did describe as consciously cruel in a report identifying what it described as severe human rights violations at the heart of the UK government benefit system. Based on dignity, fairness and respect, our systems mitigate the worst of UK government austerity and invests in the people of Scotland, providing vital assistance to enable older people to heat their homes and to help disabled people live independent lives. We are investing £644 million in 25-26 in our package of 7 benefits and payments that are only available in Scotland, including the Scottish Child Payment. And I agree entirely with the UN's observations that the UK government must end the unacceptable 2-child cap, which, in the light of the UK government's failure to act, we are working to end in Scotland by next April. On child poverty, we are committed to meeting our 2030 child poverty targets. The 25-26 Scottish budget prioritises action to eradicate child poverty, not only through our social security system, but through much wider investment, including breakfast clubs, employability support and free bus travel. So, in conclusion, Convener, thank you for your patience. I look forward to answering the questions of the committee today and, of course, working with you to further embed good practice on the follow-up process to international reporting mechanisms.
Thank you. Thank you, Minister. Minister, can I ask, what is the Scottish Government's current timeline for introducing the Human Rights Bill, and will that include full incorporation of ISESCR rights?
So it remains our intention to bring forward the Human Rights Bill in the next parliamentary session, subject, of course, to the outcome of the 26 election. And in the meantime, before the summer recess, we will publish a discussion paper setting out our proposed approach to the bill to facilitate further extensive engagement with stakeholders.
Thank you. Will there be mechanisms included to ensure that there is public participation and accountability in the implementation of these rights?
So it will, proposals for the bill have been informed by extensive engagement over a number of years with a range of rights holders, duty bearers, civil society, representatives and, of course, other stakeholders as well. And this has included hearing views from a dedicated lived experience board and engagements with groups that are facing historic and ongoing barriers, including organisations representing, for instance, Gypsy and traveller communities, refugees, migrants and asylum seekers. And as we move forward, we will continue to listen to the voices of lived experience and marginalised communities alongside the civil societies and the public sector bodies, legal experts and, of course, academics. The proposals for the bill itself include mechanisms such as the creation of a human rights scheme and reporting duties on public bodies that grounds public participation and accountability into the framework and its implementation.
Okay, thank you. We're now going to move on to questions from Evelyn Tweed, please.
Thanks, Convener, and good morning, Minister and officials. Will the Government commit to ensuring duties in the bill apply across all public bodies and not just the Scottish Government, and how might this be done?
Thank you, Ms Tweed, for that question. I mean, undoubtedly, it's a very complex area and we're continuing to work through it. For instance, the 2021 judgment by the UK Supreme Court on the United Nations Conventions on the Rights of the Child Incorporation Scotland Bill highlighted the complexities on human rights incorporation in a devolved context. We want to work with the UK Government to explore these complexities in relation to the scope of the duties that we're proposing in the Human Rights Bill. In March, the Centre for Public Policy at the University of Glasgow, they hosted an event that brought together academics, officials and other interested actors from Scotland and, of course, across the UK to discuss issues that were arising from the 2021 Supreme Court judgment, including the incorporation of human rights. So we will continue to work with the UK Government and provide further updates on that in due course.
Thanks, Minister. And you've touched on this in an earlier answer, but maybe you can expand a bit. How will the bill embed effective remedies and accountability for rights breaches?
Yeah, I mean, that's sort of, it's a very good question, and there are two main strands to that piece of work in order to increase the accountability for human rights under the bill. So the first is to establish a shared, an approach that shares human rights leadership and responsibility that's amongst several bodies. We therefore propose expanding the powers and the remits of a number of bodies, including the Scottish Human Rights Commission, the Children and Young People's Commissioner, Scotland, the Scottish Public Services Ombudsman, and other oversight bodies. So our hope is that this will strengthen their ability to provide accountability and support for human rights in Scotland. The second strand of this work are measures that will enable courts and tribunals to deliver effective and appropriate remedies where it is found that a duty bearer has failed in its duty regarding the rights protected by the bill. We'll publish a discussion paper before the summer that will set out in greater detail our approach to bill policy.
Okay. Thanks for that, Minister. That's me.
Thank you. Minister, we've heard a bit about different departments and accountability of people within there in terms of delivery. I was wondering, could you tell us a bit about the treaty body tracking tool that the Scottish Government is developing?
Yeah, I can do. I can give you an overview of that, and then if convener is minded to allow Alex to come in on that, who's been working on that quite closely. So a design group, as I mentioned in my opening remarks, has been convened that consists of stakeholders with expertise in human rights monitoring and implementation, and recognising the crucial role that Parliament plays in implementation and scrutiny. There are Scottish Parliament officials that are members of the design group. The Scottish Government and delivery partners are working with a view to launching an initial product by March 2026, following, of course, engagement with stakeholders and subject to the technical and functional specifications being deliverable. One of the intended outcomes of the Human Rights Tracker is to improve transparency by creating a tool that is open and publicly accessible. So this in turn will support civil society and the Scottish Parliament to monitor and interrogate process and hold government to account to drive that improvement and that policy resilience. I'm quite happy to bring in. Thank you. Alex, would you?
Hi there. Thank you very much for the question. Yes, and just to build on what the Minister was saying there, this is a commitment that was made in autumn of last year by the Cabinet Secretary to publish a tracker by March 2026. We've had the first meeting of the design group, and we've got another one in the diary. It hosts, the design group is made up of a host of stakeholders from the Scottish Human Rights Commission, Professor Miller, the consortium, amongst others, and parliamentary officials. And we're just at the process of investigating what that looks like, what that platform, that digital platform looks like through discussion papers and conversations. So we're on track for March 2026.
Okay, thank you. We'll now move on to questions from Marie McNair, please.
Thank you, Convener, and good morning, Minister and your officials. In your opening contributions, you set out what the Scottish Government's doing to eradicate child poverty. I'd maybe want to ask you specifically what how the Government's responding to SESCR's recommendations in regards to food insecurity.
Sorry, I missed the end there.
I was just saying there we could respond, and specifically with regards to how the Scottish Government is responding to SESCR's recommendations on food insecurity.
Thank you for that. So Eradicating child poverty in Scotland is a national mission, and the First Minister's top priority for this government. The Scottish Government has implemented a broad range of actions to achieve its interim and final child poverty targets. These are detailed through annual progress reports published for the periods 2018 to 19 and then again 2023 to 2024. Over this time, the Scottish Government has introduced and delivered new social security payments, including 5 family payments to directly tackle child poverty, and that would be the Scottish Child Payment, the Best Starts Foods, the 3 Best Start grants that are paid at key stages of a child's life. The Scottish Government has also taken action across the drivers of poverty reduction, including nearly doubling the funded early learning and childcare to the 1140 hours for all 3- and 4-year-olds and eligible 2-year-olds. We've also established devolved employability services, supporting almost 28,000 parents between April 2021 and September 2024. And this includes helping more than 19,000 parents through our targeted parental employability support, delivered under the No One Left Behind approach, with over 8,500 parents through the Fair Start Scotland as well.
Thank you. What steps are being taken to embed intersectionality and equality into all anti-poverty and social security strategies?
Thank you, Ms McNair. I think it's sort of like, if you'll forgive me, I'll just touch on the food bit of it. I think because I didn't hear that bit the first time, it sort of went out of my head the second time as well. So with regards to sort of like food insecurity and ending the need for food banks, which I think we all want to work towards. In June 2023, the Scottish Government published the Cash First towards ending the need for food banks in Scotland plan in order to help improve the response to the crisis and reduce the need for emergency food parcels. This plan does take a human rights-based approach to food insecurity, which includes the promotion of dignity, respect and choice, human rights funding and rights-based interventions. The Scottish Government is taking forward 9 actions over 3 years, and that would be from 2023 to 2026, to help improve response to crisis and reduce the need for emergency food parcels. So I hope that, you know, should the committee require, or Ms McNair wants to come back on food insecurity, I'd be happy to provide further on that. Would it be okay if you just repeated the second question? Thank you, that would be helpful.
Sure. I was just saying what steps have been taken to embed intersectionality and equality into all anti-poverty and social security strategies.
Yeah, thank you for that. It's a really important question. And we must, of course, remember that sort of like, you know, everything with regards to social security benefits, that goes through quite robust sort of equality impact assessments, which look at intersectionality across the board to make sure that we do have the intended outcomes that we want to have. The Social Security Scotland Act of 2018 established a legal duty on the Scottish Government to promote take-up of devolved entitlements, unlike the UK Government, which doesn't have an equivalent strategy. Our benefit take-up strategy has made clear commitments to supporting access to social security across both the Scottish Government and Social Security Scotland. So we try and make sure that, you know, there's as much uptake as possible, and to promote sort of like, you know, entitlements, I suppose, raising aware of people's entitlements. And that includes initiatives such as access to independence advocacy support for disabled people, co-location of Social Security Scotland local delivery services in community spaces, and targeting the marketing of devolved payments. So to make sure that, you know, it's accessible, it's available to different communities in different locations, because we know that some people will have sort of physical barriers to getting help as well. Our disability benefits were designed with our clients, including adult disability payment application process, which has been designed with disabled people to ensure that it's clear and straightforward as possible. For example, the adult disability payment, there are no assessments that are carried out by a private sector provider. Instead, consultations are delivered by Social Security Scotland when required. The consultation is an objective discussion between the client and a practitioner, and it's based on trust. Doesn't include formal sort of doesn't include a functional sort of dehumanising examination in that sense. There is an independent review of adult disability payment that is currently underway, and the final report will be published in July 2025. The Chair, of course, will make recommendations for improvement of that to ensure that benefits do continue to meet the needs of disabled people as set out in the principles of the Social Security Scotland Act that I mentioned. We also try and make sure, just going back to the accessibility bit, to make it as accessible and as inclusive as possible. So the Social Security Scotland have a multi-channel approach to that. So that includes online availability, telephone, web chats, face-to-face, to ensure that, you know, those who choose not to or cannot, for instance, use digital methods, they are also able to access services as well. So I hope that that is helpful.
Yeah, and I think it is so important that, you know, the voice of those with lived experience shape, you know, our policies and strategies going forward. And I certainly welcome your assurance that that engagement will continue to happen. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, we sort of like, you know, identifying the sort of like the 6 priority groups that we have, which is sort of like, you know, that are at the highest risk. Is like lone parents, minority ethnic families, families with disabled adult and children, families with young mothers that are under 25, and families with children under 1, or have larger families, and that sort of like would be children, 3 children or more. So we're very focused on supporting those 6 sort of identified groups that are the highest risk, because we know that actually 90% of all children in poverty live within those 6 priority family types. So what we're doing is we're building our knowledge and understanding of the barriers that these families face in moving out of poverty. And of course you will have that intersectionality across those as well. For instance, you know, you could the ethnic minority family that has 3+ children, and one of those children might in fact be, you know, a disabled child as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Convener, that's me. I'll hand you back.
Okay, thank you. We'll now move on to questions from Tess White, please.
Thank you, Convener. Good morning, Minister. My question's around the rights of women, disabled people, LGB community, TI+ community and racialised minorities. And you said at the start that the Scottish Government are aiming to be the human rights guarantor for all the people in Scotland. So my question is, how will you prioritise the rights of those particular groups in upcoming policy reviews? And I specifically like to mention the Fairer Scotland duty and the Social Security Charter?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that question. We take a panel approach, so panel participation, accountability, non-discrimination, equality, empowerment and legality as well. So we take that approach to policy making, which means that we actively engage with communities across Scotland in the development and the implementation of policies. So that ensures that our policies are inclusive and effective by reflecting diverse perspectives. For example, the publication and the continuing improvements of the Equality and Fairer Scotland budget statement alongside the Scottish budget is evidence of that commitment, and I think I've mentioned that at previous appearances in front of this committee. The differential impact of budgetary decisions according to protected characteristics, including sex, are considered as part of the budget process in line with our statutory duties. And of course, it is our statutory duty to produce a charter, and that charter is subject to regular review and a report on the performance as well on a yearly basis on that. So all statutory equality impacts are already considered under the public sector equality duty, which includes the requirement to pay due regard to the characteristic of sex as well.
Thank you, Minister. That's welcome, and particularly bearing in mind that we had a whole session on the public sector equality duties and all 9 of them. So thank you. So my follow-up question is, and you talk about sex as a protected characteristic. So following the Supreme Court judgment on the definition of a woman, how will the Scottish Government actively prioritise the sex-based rights of women in upcoming policy reviews?
I think, well, I mean, at the moment, with the sort of like, well, with the Supreme Court judgment that has come out, I think that there was a meeting on, there was a meeting on the 30th of April. I wasn't privy to that meeting, so I think it would be fair to pass on to Kat there.
Yeah, happy to come in. So just for clarity as well, the Supreme Court issued a decision in relation to the definition of woman under the Equality Act 2010. So it's important to use the full definition of that in that space. So there was a short life working group meeting that was convened last Thursday, which was the 30th, or sorry, the Wednesday. It was Wednesday afternoon, and this took in various different departments across government, where I followed a meeting with the EHRC earlier that morning, where there was a discussion around the interim update, not interim guidance, that the EHRC had produced in the matter, and we had expressed to the EHRC that we were very much keen to work with them as they develop the guidance and they go through it and what the process for that would be. And then we also said that the Scottish Government is at the moment examining all the legislation and policy that may be impacted by the guidance, and EHRC were very content with the process that we were taking in that as well. So
confirming that the SNP government are actually proactively looking at all the policies in relation to the judgment. So my follow-up question, Minister, is around just if you have any further detail on the forthcoming equality strategy for women and girls announced by Shirley Ann Somerville on the 22nd of April, and any thoughts about the organisations that will be involved in that?
Are you able to provide?
Yes, I'm happy to come in on that. So the First Minister's National Advisory Council on Women and Girls put forward a number of calls to action or recommendations, and one of which was that there would be a strategy for equality for women and girls in Scotland. So we have started some of the engagement on that already with them. Initially, it was just with the National Advisory Council of Women and Girls and their lived experience panel as well. So that has got quite a wide representation across public bodies in Scotland and also people with lived experience. But we will go much more extensive and further in terms of our engagement and consultation, and we're working through now who that would be involved in that.
And any idea on timing of that?
So for the consultation, we would expect to be running different types of events for different groups of stakeholders. Some might have sensitive information that we want to really treat in a very respectful way. It's also important for us to engage with public bodies too. So it will be a pretty long engagement process, because what we're looking to do is a very considered and strategy that will cover all of the equality rights for women and girls in Scotland across the next 10 years. So it's a significant piece of work. So it's not going to be a short-term consultation period for like 2 weeks. This will run for a number of months and would be quite extensive as to who we would involve in it. But I don't have the names yet because of the different organisations, because we're just not at that stage of working through them yet.
And if I may, just one follow-up question on that. How will you make sure that all the organisations, the right organisations, are involved and reviewing that, particularly in the light of the Supreme Court judgment?
Do you mean in reviewing the strategy?
Yes, and organisations giving input into the consultation.
Yes, so it would be designing and co-producing the strategy, obviously, because we're not the review stage as it hasn't been written, but we would have a wide range of organisations that would be involved. That would, if you are perchance talking around gender critical colleagues who are involved in them, I have numerous meetings that I'll be proposing to have with them over the course of the next while, and we've already written to them to suggest that.
So you've already written to the organisations who may be involved, and then they'll...
No, I've already written to gender critical colleagues to the different organisations that we've engaged with who hold those views to have further meetings with them. We haven't designed the list of engagement groups yet for the wider strategy, but we would be very content if anybody who would like to be involved in that.
So they can write to you and,
oh, yes, of course.
You'll review. And any idea on the timescale of that? Is it the next couple of months?
I would say we want to work at pace in this, so happy to start having meetings on this and over the summer as well with it.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. We have a supplementary from Pam Gossel, please.
Thank you, Convener. Good morning, Minister and officials. I've got two supplementaries. Just to follow on from Tess, Minister, the recent decision by the UK Supreme Court in London and the Court of Session here in Edinburgh has made it clear that women and girls need to be protected. Single-sex spaces and services are vital for their protection. Yet all too often this government has put gender ideology above the rights of women and girls. Therefore, will the Scottish Government be implementing the interim statement of the EHRC on the practical implications of the UK Supreme Court judgment? And Minister, don't you think the longer we wait, not only are you putting women and girls at risk, but also leaving public bodies liable to cases such as the Sandy Peggy case? And I know you have updated us a little bit on this stuff, but I think to me it's about the fact that the waiting, that people are involved every day, people have been involved in this, women and girls are not protected at this moment even though the judgment is passed. So it'd be really good, Minister, if you could clarify what you're doing at this moment while you're waiting for certain things.
I understand the member's frustration. So the enforcement lies with the EHRC, and you are right to point out that it was interim update. It wasn't guidance that was put out. So as far as I understand, that the EHRC is working at a pace and will be issuing their guidance, I believe June, towards the end of June. And in the meantime, what the Scottish Government is doing is that we are reviewing across sort of, a wide range of, I think Kat earlier sort of specified all the different areas. So we are in a state of readiness that at that time, when the EHRC issues its guidance, we will be in a position where we will be able to move forward at pace at that point.
Well, Minister, thank you. That's very good to hear that if you're going to move at pace, because, like I said, it is the protection, but also there's rights as well, and there could be more court cases. My other question is, Minister, I wrote to you asking the Scottish Government will be implementing the recommendations of the Sullivan Review on collecting data based on biological sex. In your response to my written question, you wrote that the Scottish Government has previously committed to reviewing its guidance on collecting data on sex and gender by the end of 2026 as part of the Non-Binary Equality Action Plan. When my colleague Tess White highlighted in the Chamber last week that there are serious safeguarding risks around changing the gender marker of children in the NHS records, she received a non-answer from the Cabinet Secretary. Therefore, as Equalities Minister, would you be able to give me a clear answer as to whether the children's gender markers should be changed in NHS records?
Yeah, to give a specific answer, I'm going to make sure that we get it technically correct for you, so I'll pass on to Kat, please.
I think there was two parts to that. One was in relation to the Sullivan Review, and that is something that at a Four Nations level that all the chief statisticians will be looking at as well. So there will be further information coming on that, but it was just published, I believe, a few weeks ago. So there's quite a lot to unpack in it. The second question was in relation to. I'm sorry, I'm going to have to remind me.
It's in relation to the gender, children's gender
markers, the CHI markers. So this would be a very specific question for in relation to health. So we are very happy to write to you on that, and we can pick up with officials and the Cabinet Secretary for Health as well to provide you further detail on that.
Thank you, Kat. If you could write to me on that, that would be great. Can I just ask, you just mentioned earlier on that obviously there'll be information coming forward from the Sullivan Review. There's a lot to unpack there. Obviously, in the Sullivan Review, there's parts of it that are based for the UK Government to act on, but also there's implications for the Scottish Government as well. Do you have a date for this information coming forward?
I can write to you with that as well. We were engaging with the Chief Statistician on that, so we can come back to you with some firm timetable.
Thank you, that would be really helpful. Following on from Tess's question in relation to engagement, Minister, women's rights groups, including For Women Scotland, feel neglected by the Scottish Government. This was especially true during the debate on the GRR bill, when the Scottish Government spent more time engaging with groups which supported the bill. So what is the Scottish Government doing to ensure that going forward all sides are heard equally, and can you personally guarantee in your ministerial role that women's groups such as For Women Scotland, Sex Matters and LGB Alliance will be called for evidence?
I believe that now I wouldn't be I think Kat has already mentioned the specific bodies that have been written to, and I believe that it was the Cabinet Secretary that wrote to them, not myself. So if you forgive me, I will bring Kat in on this one. Different people are taking different leads in this. You'll appreciate that, yeah.
Yes, so it was those organisations that were written to as well. I think that this sits across government in lots of different areas, and they have interests in those areas. So it's really important that they engage not just with equality officials, but that on any policy that they have an interest in, and that may sit in education, it may sit in health, etc. So part of the work that I want to continue to do with them is to consider how they can get that effective engagement at different levels across government for the work that they have got a legitimate interest in. So if, for example, and to refer to the previous question around how they engage with the strategy, that would sit under officials in my area, so I would make sure that they would have open access to engage with them as it was developing, and whether that they wanted that to be is on one-on-one or part of the wider workshops we're doing, we're amenable to working with them in whatever way that they would like to for that.
No, thank you, Kat, because I'm very pleased about that, because in the past it's not happened and these groups have spoken about it. And I think, to be honest, evidence, even whether it's in this committee or whether yourselves as the Scottish Government, it's important we hear from everybody to make sure we are implementing things the right way, but also there is a balance. But at that, in the past, these organisations haven't been heard. So I'm really pleased, Kat, that, and if it doesn't happen, I will be writing to yourself, hopefully the Minister, sorry. I'll be writing, hopefully, and making sure that we include these groups.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. I mean, I think that there is a sort of like a wider point here about sort of like women's sort of political representation as well. You know, I mean, we want to make, well, we are committed to achieving that sort of like fairer and sort of more equal political representation so that everybody's voices can be heard, right? And we do recognise that we need to do better with that representation of diversity across Scotland. So there is other work that we are doing alongside that. And of course we are engaging with the EHRC on their forthcoming guidance, which, you know, I said in my earlier answer that as soon as we get that, we will be in a state of readiness. But I mean, in the meantime, it is the Cabinet Secretary that is having that dialogue and welcomes working with them. But we're taking action on sort of like, you know, doing that sort of more diverse representation in both Parliament and, of course, at local government. So we have been calling on the UK government to introduce, for instance, gender quotas for elections across the UK, or for us to have the power to do that. We also sort of fund organisations such as Elect Her, and I know that the member has sort of appeared at events and promotion events that they have had as well. Also, we provide funding to Engender to make sure that they progress equal representation projects that they're doing. And, of course, funding for COSLA as well to support the work of the cross-party barriers to elected office special interest group as well, and of course the Young Women Lead project. So there is a wide variety of work that is going on to make sure that women are included in you know, and to maximise their participation in political life.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Can I've just got one more to touch on budgeting. Can I just have a quick one? Yeah, is that okay?
Yeah, Tess would like to come in. And then
it's just the back of what the Minister's just said, to be honest.
As long as that doesn't interfere with the question that Tess has got planned.
I think it won't, no. It's just in the back of it.
Do you want to skip over her question?
Is that... No, it's just basically about the fact that in the past, Minister, you've been in here and we spoke about like budgeting right through all the departments, looking at whether it's for, you know, how do we balance and make sure that women's rights and other rights are adhered to right through every department. So how can you guarantee that obviously things like the EHRC guidance that does come through, that it will actually you know, be implemented right through every department? Because a lot of this, like Kat said, it might be in education, it might be in different areas, it might be in your area, but we haven't got the budgeting right yet, to be honest, to be implemented right through. What kind of guarantees you can give that the EHRs will be implemented right through as well, making sure that everybody soaks up, whether it's single-sex spaces, places and services? Yeah.
Are you, sorry, can I just clarify what you mean by budgeting? Do you mean budget as in resourcing, or are you talking about sort of like budgets for individual portfolios?
No, in the past we've had you in, we spoke about making sure that when we're implementing something that every single cross-departmental understands what this budget's for, and making sure that, you know, budgeting, whether it's for women and girls, whether it's people in poverty, disability, that making sure it's aligned right through every department. And I think at that time it was said that there were gaps and issues. So it's just to make sure that when this comes across HRC guidance, that we do not face the same situation, that makes sure it is implemented right through cross-departmentally.
So, I mean, we're absolutely committed to ensuring that our policies are advancing equality and human rights for all of Scotland's people, and, of course, to embed these, as you say, across all the different portfolio areas. And that would be based on the human rights budgeting principles, which are transparency, accountability and participation. And as I mentioned earlier, the publication of the continuing improvements of the Equality and Fairness Scotland's budget statements alongside the budget is evidence of that. And the differential impact of budgetary decisions according to protected characteristics, including sex, are considered as part of the budget process in line with our statutory duties. And I think I did mention that, our statutory equality, all statutory equality impacts are already considered under the PZ that, I've given evidence on that before. The Short Life Working Group that Kat referred to, that has been tasked with looking at all legislation, policies, strategies. So they're undertaking a thorough audit to understand where are the areas that we're going to need to take action on. So once the EHRC has produced their guidance, that, as I said to you earlier, I can only sort of reaffirm that, that we will be in a state of readiness. But at previous committee meetings that I've attended, I am working really hard to mainstream everything across so that it's everybody's responsibility in every portfolio. And I'm continuing with my one-to-one meetings with ministerial colleagues and with cabinet secretaries. And no doubt that will form part of future discussions. But we all take our responsibilities very seriously in the different portfolio areas to make sure that there is a consistent and coherent response.
Thank you, Minister, and thank you, Convener.
Thank you. Now I have a question from Tess White.
Thank you, Convener, and thank you, Minister. So the previous set of questions was around exploring you listening and hearing in incorporating policies. My next question is around the rights-based budgeting. But before I ask that, if I can just go back to something that you said in relation to a question from my colleague, Pam Gossall, is you talk about gender quotas, and you mentioned elector and engender. You're conflating sex and gender. So we talk about the public sector equality duties, PSED, and there are 9 protected characteristics, one of which is sex and one of which is gender reassignment. So in terms of you reviewing policies, then it's very important to differentiate between sex and gender. And I'm hoping from this session, when you say you're hearing what people are saying, that actually mindful that when you say gender, do you mean gender or do you mean sex?
Yeah, no, you're quite correct to point that out in the light of the Supreme Court judgment, and that judgment was very clear. The Scottish Government has accepted that. However, we must also be aware, and I know that you are, is that there's a lot of terminology that uses both of those terms. So in my answer to Pam Gossall's question, I was referring to quotas with regards to representation, and of course the Supreme Court ruled on that because that's originally how it came about. It was about gender representation on public boards, so it specified that. Yeah, so I'm very mindful of that. Thank you.
I think it's almost as though a line has been drawn, and so moving forwards. So when you talk about elector and engender, very good organisations, but they focus on gender, not biological sex. And I suppose this matters because my next question is around funding. So in terms of rights-based budgeting, Minister, I did write to you about how the Scottish Government funds and supports third sector and activist organisations in the regard that I've just mentioned. And I did write to you, but I'm still waiting to hear or have a response. So maybe if I can resend that letter to you in the light of the judgment, and you can now write to me. I'd appreciate that. And in that, I talk about millions of pounds. There's all these figures. Recent one was £500 million, huge amounts of money that have been spent by this SNP government on a gender self-ID echo chamber. And I have used that word. It is an echo chamber with the likes of the Equality Network, Stonewall, LGBT Youth Scotland. But women's groups advocating for sex-based rights feel, and there is evidence that they've been marginalised and they feel maligned. So in terms of moving forwards, I think it's very important to recognise that, particularly when you're looking at funding. And if you're only funding those organisations who agree with your view, then there's a huge issue moving forward. So my question is, because of that, and my colleague talked about costly litigation, and we can't talk about specific cases, but if the Scottish Government doesn't move at pace, there will be huge litigation for NHS, for the hospitals, for schools, leisure centres, right across the board. And I think what the public sector feel right now is that they're having to scramble to unravel something. So I suppose my question is, will the SNP government and this government and the Minister finally accept that rights-based budgeting doesn't just mean funding the groups that agree with you?
Thank you for that. I understand what you're getting at, and you're covering a lot of areas there. I think, to be very, very clear, the Scottish Government procures certain services, and organisations, including third sector, they are sort of monitored, and they have the day-to-day funding governance by Inspire. They're also sort of covered by Oscar as well. So there is thorough scrutiny and governance that goes on there. And at this time, there are certain groups of people, including transgender at the moment, that are feeling particularly vulnerable. So some of those organisations that I've had questions from yourself about before, we, for instance, do fund a suicide helpline. So the funding is there to provide a service that people need in order to be able to sort of deal with mental health issues, regarding their protected characteristics. So they are specific we procure specific services in that matter. So it's not a question of funding any particular type of ideology. There are specific services that we procure. But I could maybe bring in Kat for a little bit further, should you wish to.
I think the Minister covered most of that. Yeah. I think it's just worth noting that the Equality, Inclusion and Human Rights Fund it funds people under the Equality Act. But as the Minister has quite rightly said, it's for services. It's not core funding. It's not. Yeah. We don't fund them as lobbying organisations. We fund organisations that provide services to communities and groups of people to do specific things that are to advance equality, inclusion, human rights, and they have to bid into that fund. And it is, as you would imagine, one that is very overprescribed. It covers all the protected characteristics. So we have a wide range of, particularly disabled people organisations as well, that access it.
And I accept that. And Minister, funding help desks and suicide prevention is very, very important. But if you find out that groups that you're funding are giving misinformation through guidance, will you commit to stopping their funding if you've got the evidence in front of you?
Well, there is. I'm not sure I have the scope to do that because they have. we have robust sort of like, there's an accountable officer involved. There, Inspire Scotland are the people who do that impartially, I suppose. They have that impartial judgment. Maybe Kat could explain how that actually works in the...
Yeah, well, it also, the EHRC play a significant role in that. It would be for them to intervene as the regulator for the Equality Act in any of those organisations and to advise them if their guidance is incorrect. If you're suggesting that, therefore, if that did happen, what would the Scottish Government's response to that be? There'd be questions for Oscar in relation to that, because they would be charitable organisations. And we would need to consider all that evidence in terms of if we were to continue funding them or to give them new funding in a different setting next year.
So just to check my understanding, because this is, you know, we're talking about hundreds of millions of pounds here, taxpayer money. If people, what you're saying is if people have evidence that guidance is incorrect and against the law, that people need to go to the EHRC to complain, not to the Scottish Government, and then you'll wait for guidance or direction from the EHRC rather than you taking a view over the funding. So the filter is with them, not with you.
Yeah, I would refer to what the EHRC would say to that, which would be that they are the regulator and it would be for them to intervene in these issues. So they would suggest that people should go to them to discuss these things as well. Also, I'm curious as to the hundreds of millions of pounds of funding. If you could provide any further detail on that, might be able to.
I will.
To enhance my question.
You. So it's like, so you're waiting for guidance from the EHRC before the Scottish Government takes a view to switching the taps off of any funding.
I don't think that is a fair representation of what I said, but I'll repeat it again for the record, which is that the EHRC are in the process of developing guidance. The Scottish Government has taken the position, as has all the other devolved nations and the UK Government as well, of which the EHRC are well aware, which is that we need to wait for guidance from them in terms of producing or changing any more of our own guidance, but that we should put ourselves into a state of readiness and to understand what we need to change in the event of their guidance coming forward. So it's definitely a very proactive approach that we're taking. This would be the position that they would have expect all organisations to be in. So if you were a third sector organisation and you were developing guidance on this issue, the EHRC would and has saying, take account of the Supreme Court decision and look what we've said in it. Get yourself as far forward as you can. But obviously, statutory guidance is statutory guidance, and there's complexities that they need to unpick, and they need to go through their own significant consultation process with this as well. So all of that needs to be in place. That would be the position that the EHRC are taking in this regard, that it is legitimate and proportionate to wait until the guidance is issued from the regulator because of the potential consequences of getting it wrong as well, because they would say that that would have potential implications and high litigation costs as well for people if they don't get it right.
So the Scottish Government is not funding lobby groups to give guidance on interpretation of the law?
The Scottish Government funds a range of organisations to provide particular services under the Equality, Inclusion and Human Rights Fund, all of which are available. We've made available to the committee before, and I'm happy to do so again, but they're public record and part of Inspire in Scotland. But they're to deliver projects and programmes of work, so they will be very specific. You would get £10,000 funding to deliver a community project in this area. So they're not. We do not do core funding, which is for the wider lobbying things that they do. It would be much more about giving funding for specific services.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Camille.
Okay, thank you. Now go back to Pam Gossel, please.
Oh no, I'm fine, Camille. I actually tied my questions in. Thank you.
Okay.
Oh, sorry.
Thank you. Now move on to questions from Paul Kane, please.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Convener, and good morning to the Minister and officials. I suppose I'm interested in parliamentary scrutiny and how we ensure that scrutiny of ISESCA rights continues. I suppose the first place I would like to go is to understand will an implementation plan or an action plan in response to the concluding observations be brought forward? Is that the plan of the government? And if so, when does the Minister expect to be able to publish that?
Thank you. It's the Equality, Inclusion and Human Rights Directorate that has responsibility for overseeing the reporting and the implementation of the ISCA, including cross-governmental coordination on that. A human rights treaty reporting, monitoring and implementation group provides coordination for all Scottish Government human rights reporting treaty activity, including a consistent and cross-cutting approach to the implementation of the treaty body recommendations. An internal group of treaty bodies, leads, has also been coordinated to develop a consistent Scottish Government approach to treaty body recommendations. I can bring Alex in to give you a more specific on the timeline.
Yes, absolutely. And I think your question there was around how we're going to make a plan to bring forward the implementation of the concluding observations from ISESCA. So, yeah, in previous years and in previous cycles, we have developed what we called a position statement, which was a broad and in-depth view on the list of issues and the recommendations of previous exercises. That gave a very in-depth view, policy view on what the Scottish Government position was on that. We are moving away from those position statements because we felt that they weren't landing correctly with stakeholders. They weren't landing very well with parliamentary bodies. So we're working with stakeholders at the moment to understand what is going to be the most useful way of presenting information around how we plan to look at those recommendations and, where possible, implement them. I also refer you to the fact that we're developing a digital tracker tool come March next year. That will be a tool where we will gather the recommendations from various exercises with a view to how we improve and implement internally and how we drive scrutiny and accountability externally. Hope that answers your question.
I mean, I think in part, the point about implementation, I think, is important, because I think what we heard in evidence last week, and we've heard in evidence throughout many sessions in relation to ISESCA or human rights more broadly, is that there's a lack of implementation and delivery. So I think we could rehearse, the government deciding not to bring forward certain pieces of legislation, for example, or deciding not to do certain things. So what I'm keen to understand is, rather than broad positions perhaps on statement, is it the Minister's intention to have a very clear implementation plan that's linked to either legislative actions within Programme for Government, for example, or policy updates and things that the government have the power to do?
Yeah, I think you said it very well. I mean, you'll be fully aware that it will be all of those things, but the most important thing is going to be that embedding that kind of human rights approach across everything, and that is the cultural bit that has to happen, which is why I talked about that kind of participation, consultation, collaboration, which is really important, because it's not just one it's not just going to be just the Scottish Government in that sense. It's going to require public bodies, a wide variety of stakeholders. So if we have that approach that's embedded from the get-go, if that's your starting point, then that is important, and we need to take people with us in order to do that. So the tracker tool is open. I mean, it's going to be available to yourself, the committee, members of the general public. So it is very open to be able to track the progress that is being made across all the duty bearers. It's therefore accountable, transparent, and it can be tracked, which I think you know, I mean, I think that is to be welcomed, that it's not just a tool that we're not going to be marking our own homework in that sense, that this is actually a tool that's available for everyone to be holding us and everyone else that's responsible for the implementation of those rights. Yeah.
And it would be your view that within the tracker tool, it will have, you know, definitive actions in terms of any legislative plans or policy changes?
Can I?
Yes, happy to answer that. May I just go back to your previous question as well? And we need to admit that we have got it wrong in the past. There is a gap around where we have been able to fulfil that need about the information that's available and how we make that information available. So we recognise that that has been a gap, and we are looking to fill that gap. So just to close off that bit. Sorry, what was the question?
Just that the tracker tool will be the tool that we will use to analyse the government's legislative programme.
Yes, exactly. So, I mean, we're working with stakeholders on that at the moment as to what it will look like. But the idea is that it will take the recommendations from the various interactive dialogues and meetings with UN special rapporteurs and draw all of that data together into one place, so that it will so that it becomes a bit of a data bank, recognising also that we have a gap around collecting data and using data to drive evidence-based policy making. So we'll be using that tracker in that space, but we're working with stakeholders in that in those discussions to make sure that the tracker is going to answer those questions and provide that platform for people.
Okay, and then I wonder if I can just, in terms of the tracker, I think, you know, that's very welcome to hear that it will be available to MSPs and to the public. But I wonder how the Minister intends to update parliamentarians and be subject to that level of scrutiny. So, you know, will there be reporting back to this committee in terms of what we've just discussed, and does she intend to provide perhaps regular updates to Parliament more broadly on the issues?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. You know, this is really, really useful that we're doing this. I would also sort of like, you know, open it up to sort of like other committees as well, because it does cover a wide range of portfolios. And with regards to the ISCA recommendations, you know, we're continuing to explore with stakeholders how the Scottish Government will respond publicly, because these conversations are taking place right now. I don't want to be sitting here to say, well, actually, this is the most effective method of communication. From our point of view, it's really important to hear what is the most effective way of accountability from the people that we are accountable to. So those conversations are taking place. More widely, of course, we are engaging with Scottish Parliament officials as well as stakeholder experts. And on the you know, we've talked about the digital tracker, which, you know, we're hoping that that will drive the implementation and the improvement, the scrutiny, the accountability. And of course, you know, I would welcome more regular engagement with the committee on international human rights treaty reporting, the monitoring of it, as well as the implementation of it. And that, of course, can take many ways. You know, it can be me coming and speaking to you directly. You're welcome, as the committee does, write to me regularly for interim updates on such matters. And of course, you know, I'll welcome sort of like any other suggestions that the committee may wish to make. I would happily consider those. You know, we know that sort of like the committee role in monitoring is really, really important. You take a lead role in that, as the Parliament does, in supporting and overseeing the implementation of human rights. And that's been formally recognised. And indeed, you know, getting rights right, published by this committee in 2018, set out that the Parliament and its committee's role as a guarantor of human rights, and I have the utmost respect for that. The ISCA committee also noted the crucial role that Parliament plays in advancing the present concluding observations. So, you know, I'll just emphasise again that I see the Scottish Parliament's committees as playing a central role in monitoring and scrutinising the implementation of ISCA, the concluding observations and other treaty body recommendations more widely.
Thank you. I mean, that's something I think committee will want to consider in terms of ongoing scrutiny. So I think that was useful, convener. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So thank you. That concludes our formal business in public this morning, and I want to thank you all once again for coming along. We will now move into private to consider the remaining items on our agenda. Thank you.